The Kremlin's central authority is fragmenting, and that's all because they're very tight on cash. We see the cracks now appearing in three distinct places, all at one time. We see it in the money, we see it in the command chain, and now we see it in the security situation. Russia's energy revenues fell about $9.4 billion just last month. That is a loss of about 65% month over month. And when the center loses cash, it loses the ability to enforce outcomes. And that is when a political system starts to behave more like a marketplace, because everything then has to be negotiated. There's no longer certainty as to what will happen. Moscow compensates in the only way that it can. It tries to find other methods to move its money. It pushes money into riskier channels. And that adds a new pressure that Russia has never known before. Because the moment the money has to move through the sanctions evasion network, Russia's control over it begins to slip. Every cutout, he takes a fee, and every reroute adds a delay. And all of this culminates into Russia's making less money for every barrel of oil that is sold. The sanctions evasion system is expensive, and it's quite fragile. But not being able to call the shots and being dependent on others, that means that today Russia's fate is not in its own hands, but in the fate of others. But this lack of certainty means that Russia cannot efficiently plan its budget nor its own future. Because when the timing breaks, the payroll breaks. And when the payroll breaks, the command chain is no longer controllable. And that is how a cash problem becomes a command problem. Now ask yourself a question. Who is it, though, that gains from this? Who has the leverage in this shift? Well, in Russia's self inflicted trap, there is only one country that gains the most, and that country is China. China holds a switch on the sanctions evasion pipeline. Beijing decides what compliance risk it is willing to tolerate, and Moscow is forced to live with those consequences. The discounts today are decided by Beijing. It is not Moscow that dictates the discounts that it gives on its oil. And in late 2025, that discount was about $24 per barrel. So as the Kremlin scrambles to plug the financial loss, its friends are cashing in on its constraints. Russia accepts these punitive terms because it has fewer alternatives. It has absolutely no clean options left to it. And once Moscow accepts worse terms abroad, it has to compensate for them back at home. And that's when the center begins to squeeze its governors. That's when it starts to struggle to fill the gaps. And that's exactly when we see the finance become a problem of fractures in the periphery. And this is how a great power looks when it's in decline. Regional compliance starts to look more transactional than ever before. Consider the case of Tatarstan. It reported enlistment bonuses to join the Russian military of $31,000. But today, it's down to $8,000. But that's still much better than a place like Perm. They had to cut their enlistment bonus from $8,000 to $0. But Moscow, nonetheless, it demands more soldiers. But the governors, they don't have the cash for this. So now they are bargaining with Moscow. And it means that today, for Moscow, it'll be difficult to get them in line. Because the governors today, if they realize that Moscow is not omnipotent, it cannot make them do anything, that's where you face rebellion in the regions. Now, for months, we've been watching as groups like Atesh have been leading their own efforts across Russia to overthrow the Putin regime. We've seen the fires on the railroads. We've seen attacks across the country. And these are all signs that within Russia, there's growing hostility towards Moscow. There's growing instability. But what can Russia do at this point? Where can it turn to find a solution? So, of course, it looks to its natural allies. But today, Venezuela is not able to help. Maduro has his own problems. Iran, it would usually be happy to help, but Iran has got significant problems as it prepares for a potential war. But even in the criminal ecosystem, it is now today not possible for Russia to work there. Look what we see today in Mexico. The drug cartels in Latin America are famous for being experts in money laundering, a very convenient skill that the Russians could use right now. But today, those drug cartels are in open war with the Mexican government due to the assassination of their leader. And now that he's been killed, they need to focus on their own problems. But within Russia, there's something else that is happening that's quite dramatic. We see that the elites in Moscow are not sure what their own future is. They're not sure or what to do about the fact that one out of every eight billionaires on the Forbes list of Russia has had their assets taken by the state in the past couple of years. The elites in Russia understand very well that there's less and less money. And the people at the FSB, the Federal Security Service of Russia, they're quite clear on that as well. And that's why they're doing everything they can to seize up the money everywhere they can find it in Russia. But that's leading to something else. Because when the FSB and the rival agencies start to eat each other, that decides who will, in the end, control the money. And he who controls the money is the one that will survive. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a Kiev-based national security advisor and a Kiev Post special correspondent. Vladimir Putin is facing mounting problems across a broad spectrum of fronts. Abroad, he is running out of so-called allies, and his so-called friends are unable to give him much assistance. They've got their own problems to deal with, and his are his alone. But that economic hardship is leading to political tensions within Russia, and those problems are putting the Putin regime into a very difficult position. However, Vladimir Putin, incredibly, still believes that he can win in Ukraine. His reasoning is quite simple. He understands that it will not be a military victory. However, he believes they can still outsmart the West, and that by convincing some that Russia is winning, that the West will capitulate to its position, that the West will essentially abandon Ukraine, and that he will be able to reap the benefits of this betrayal. However, there's one very important and fundamental flaw in Vladimir Putin's strategy, and that is that simply Russia is today not winning in Ukraine. Russia is losing, and it is Putin himself and his regime that should fear the word capitulation. As Ukraine is fighting the tide against this false narrative that Russia is winning, help us get the truth to more people. All I ask you is this. Please help us reach 275,000 subscribers. Subscribe now, leave comments below, and share this video with others and on social media. Like and leave your comments below. And you can consider becoming a channel member today. Now, as we've discussed in recent days, sometimes in Russia, it becomes very uncertain what's going to happen. It becomes very unclear. But at this point, it becomes more and more clear that Putin is perhaps not aware how bad the situation has become. He seems to think that his country somehow can pull it all together, but the evidence does not support that. One thing that Vladimir Putin has done for years to give himself more power is to crack down on his own population to make sure that they were not free. One means of doing that was to use things like Roskomnadzor, which is the government censor in Russia. They've blocked 439 VPN services just in the past 3 months. Throttling, it disrupts the encrypted apps, though, of the military coordination, and that's a secondary consequence for Putin's need to censor his own people. But VPNs are an important thing. They allow people to surf the internet and to not be exposed to their government. They can freely use the web. Before we dive deeper into today's analysis, I want to address your digital security. Browsing the internet on an unprotected device is like sending a private message to a group chat. Eventually, everyone sees it. Whether it's your ISP, hackers, or government censors, your data is often more exposed than you think. When you browse on an unprotected device, your device is transmitting a great amount of information out into the open, which can be viewed by various different entities before reaching the intended website. And that is why I personally use Private Internet Access. A VPN, or virtual private network, essentially creates an encrypted tunnel for your connection, hiding your IP address and shielding your digital life. PIA is the world's most transparent provider with over 30 million downloads. They have a strict no logs policy that has been proven in court multiple times and verified by an independent audit from Deloitte. They simply don't store your data. Beyond security, it's a great tool for global access. With servers in 91 countries and all 50 US states, you can bypass regional restrictions, like those streaming services and sports events have and access more content than ever before. Best of all, one subscription protects an unlimited number of your devices simultaneously, so you can protect your entire household. But we see that authoritarian regimes the world over, they typically do this. They crack down on those who want to use the internet by making sure that it is censored, by making sure they can monitor every step that somebody makes. But within China, which is another country that often censors its own citizens, that often spies on them, We see that Beijing is becoming more and more curious about what the future of Russia is, because Beijing today is the sole arbiter of Russia's market access for its oil. This creates massive margins for China while starving Moscow. And that's why we can honestly say that China is not a loyal ally of Russia's. Rather, China is a strategic liquidator. Moscow trades its sovereignty for a discount, and Beijing sets the clock and the price. The Kremlin today has no plan B, has nowhere to go. But why is it that Beijing is so disinterested in helping its so called friends back in Russia? Why is she not helping Putin? Well, it's important to note that Beijing remembers this century of humiliation and unequal treaties. The Treaty of Evasion in 1858 ceded the northern bank of the Amur River. Russia took 600,000 square kilometers, 231,000 square miles from a weakened Qing dynasty. The Convention of Peking in 1860, it forced China to give up the Ussuri region. This land included the strategic territory that is now Vladivostok. Chinese nationalists view these land thefts as a permanent historical debt. And today we see that within China, maps are now updated to use the Chinese names for these formerly Chinese cities. China is not supporting Russia out of some sort of friendship or shared values. Rather, Beijing is collecting interest on territories taken during its time of weakness. Today we're seeing that Beijing, it never forgets, and this debt will be paid one way or the other. And it's going to be easy for China to extract from Russia whatever it wants, because today Russia doesn't have any other options. It is against the wall. Russia, just look at the situation that it has, not being able to pay its soldiers, or look at something like its rail monopoly. Russia uses rail, it needs rail, but freight traffic has fallen 14% since the invasion began. Today, the state monopoly has a $52 billion debt. All of this is adding together to be a problem that Russia does not have a solution for, a problem which there will not be a solution for. Russia has a massive oil industry. In fact, its smuggling network is worth about $90 billion. And that network, of course, runs on a massive group of intermediaries, shell companies, and opaque routing. But today, with the widening gap between what Russia is able to make on every barrel, it's going to be harder for it to make ends meet. So for Putin, what this means in fundamental terms, what this means in simple terms, is quite clear. For Vladimir Putin, he's dealing with a situation that he has high cost. The people in the regions are now not fulfilling his orders. He's no longer able to get more people to join the military. We've seen the recent news that in places like occupied Crimea, they're forcing people to join the military. And that's because no longer are Russians willing to join. Importing people from abroad is possible. And they've been doing it for months now, from Africa as well as from Asia. But those people, there's fewer numbers coming every day. It doesn't take long for the word to get out. You probably won't be coming home once you go on that trip. So today, when we try to understand Russia's position, what Russia's trying to do, the battlefield is important. It's worth following, of course. But beside that, we have to look at the global strategy. Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine is a tactic, not the war. It is only part of something larger. It is part of his war against the West. And that's why we have to understand it in that context what Russia does today with its negotiations, when it's dealing with people such as Mr. Witkoff. You can be sure about the fact they believe that someone like him is the perfect mark, somebody who they obviously don't respect and they believe to be foolish, as they often feel about the American president as well. It's very clear to Russia that these people don't understand fundamentally how dishonest they are, that Russia is using them and abusing them and mocking them behind their backs. They believe that somehow Russia is sympathetic to them, that Russia wants to work with them, which shows a very poor comprehension of how Russia operates. Russia as a country loves to take advantage of those who are too naive, and we are seeing that today. But unfortunately, that naive attitude, it comes at a cost. There are thousands of Ukrainians who have died as we watch the charade called negotiations continue now for more than a year. Before we wrap up, big thanks again to Private Internet Access for sponsoring today's episode. If you want to protect your device and unlock a ton of extra content online, check out my link below for 83% off and 4 free months. It helps the channel and it keeps your digital life private. Vladimir Putin undoubtedly believed that invading Ukraine would be a 3-day special military operation, and by doing that, he would get the respect of the West. The West will acknowledge that Russia was a strong country. But now, just short of the 4-year anniversary, we see that Russia is not a strong state. Russia is a weak state, and the Putin regime is weaker than anyone had ever imagined. Check this out to understand why. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.